Get her out of that seat. Assistants don't sit at this table. The words didn't echo. They landed, sharp and final, like a decision already made. Naomi Ellis didn't move. Not immediately. She sat at the far end of the boardroom table, dressed in a simple charcoal blouse and slacks. No designer labels, no statement pieces, nothing that signaled power to the people around her. Just a tablet, a pen, and a stillness that didn't belong in a room like this. Around her, 12 executives filled leather chairs worth more than most people's rent, their voices low, confident, dismissive. The skyline stretched behind them through floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of view that made people believe they were untouchable. Richard Cole, the COO, didn't even look at her when he said it. We have a schedule. If she's here to take notes, she can stand. A few chuckles followed. Subtle. Practiced. The kind of laughter that wasn't meant to be loud, but was meant to be felt. Naomi lifted her eyes slowly, meeting no one in particular, yet somehow seeing everything. She had seen this before. Not this room. Not these people. But this exact moment. The assumption. The dismissal. The quiet agreement that she didn't belong. At 22, it was a conference room in Chicago, where she was asked if she was with catering. At 27, it was a pitch meeting in San Francisco, where her ideas were praised, until someone else repeated them. And now, years later, billions in valuation attached to her name, here it was again. Same tone, different suits. You're in the wrong seat, Mark Whitmore, the CFO, added, finally glancing her way. His eyes scanned her once, quick and calculated, already deciding her place. That chair is reserved for executive leadership. Naomi didn't respond. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't need to. The room continued without her, as if she had already been erased. Slides appeared on the main screen. Numbers. Projections. Discussions about restructuring. About leadership gaps. About the CEO. We need someone with presence, Richard said, leaning forward, fingers steepled. Someone who actually commands respect in a room like this. More nods. More quiet agreement. Naomi's gaze shifted slightly, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table. 14 minutes. That's how long it took for people to show you exactly who they were when they thought you didn't matter. Across the room, a young analyst named Lily Grant hesitated, her eyes flicking between Naomi and the others, sensing something off, but not yet understanding what. Naomi noticed. She always noticed the ones who paused, the ones who questioned. The room grew louder, more confident, as if her silence had validated every assumption they'd made. Richard leaned back, satisfied. So it's settled. We move forward without her. Without her. Naomi finally exhaled, slow and controlled, her eyes lifting again, not uncertain, not offended, but resolved. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in the room. Not yet. But in her. Because she wasn't here to correct them. She was here to confirm them. The room did not pause for her. It accelerated. Numbers moved across the screen, projections stacked on projections, voices overlapping with the kind of confidence that only came from never being questioned. Naomi Ellis sat still, her presence treated like background noise in a room that believed it controlled everything. Mark Whitmore tapped his pen against the table, then nodded toward the screen. Revenue dipped 2.3% last quarter. That alone tells you leadership is not aligned. Richard Cole leaned forward again, his tone sharper now, more decisive. It tells you the current CEO is not fit for where this company is going. A few heads nodded faster this time. Agreement was becoming momentum. Naomi's eyes flicked briefly to the screen, then back to the people speaking. She did not interrupt. She did not defend. She listened. That was the part they never understood. Silence was not absence. Silence was collection. We need to vote, Mark continued, already preparing the next slide. Transition leadership within the next 30 days. Quietly. Cleanly. No disruption to investor confidence. Quietly. Cleanly. Naomi almost smiled, but it never reached her face. Across the table, Lily Grant shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around her pen. She glanced at Naomi again, longer this time, as if trying to place something she could not yet name. There was a weight in Naomi's stillness that did not match the role they had assigned her. Lily felt it, even if she could not explain it. You, Richard said suddenly, his voice cutting across the table as his eyes landed on Naomi for the first time with intention. If you're going to sit in, at least do something useful. Take notes. We will need a clean summary of this meeting. The room went quiet for half a second, just long enough to see how she would respond. Naomi turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged. You want a record? She asked, her voice calm, even controlled. Richard frowned slightly, not at the question, but at the tone. It did not match the role he had placed her in. That is what I said, he replied. Naomi nodded once. Good, she said softly. You will want everything documented. Something in the room shifted, subtle but real. Mark glanced at Richard, then back at Naomi, his confidence dipping just a fraction. It was not fear. Not yet. But it was the beginning of awareness. Richard dismissed it with a small wave of his hand. Let us move forward, he said. We do not have time for distractions. Distractions. Naomi's fingers tapped once against the edge of the table, a quiet, measured rhythm. 14 minutes. They were almost there. The screen changed again, now displaying a proposed leadership chart. Names moved. Roles reassigned. Authority redistributed as if it were already done. As if the decision had already been made somewhere above consequence. Naomi studied the chart carefully, her eyes tracing each name, each position, each assumption. She recognized every single one of them. Not from introductions. Not from this meeting. But from decisions. Hiring decisions. Promotion decisions. Strategic placements she had personally approved over the past 5 years. They were rearranging a structure she built, without realizing she was sitting right there watching them do it. Lily leaned slightly toward the analyst beside her and whispered, Do you know who she is? The analyst shook his head. No idea, he whispered back. Probably support staff. Probably. Naomi heard it. Of course she did. She heard everything. And still, she said nothing. Because the most powerful moment was not when people doubted you. It was when they committed to that doubt out loud, in front of witnesses, in a room that recorded everything. Her phone, resting face down beside her tablet, vibrated once. A single notification. No sound. No light. Just a quiet signal. Naomi did not look at it immediately. She let the vibration settle into the silence of her own control. Then, slowly, she turned the screen over. One message. 2 words. Ready now? Naomi's eyes lifted again, scanning the room one last time. Every face. Every expression. Every decision already made without her. And then, for the first time since she walked in, she shifted in her seat. Not to leave. Not to comply. But to begin. Naomi Ellis placed her phone back down with deliberate precision, as if even that small motion carried weight the room was not yet ready to understand. No one noticed. Not fully. Richard was already speaking again, pacing the tempo of the meeting like a man certain of his authority. We finalized this today, he said, tapping the table once for emphasis. No delays, no second guessing. This company needs direction. Direction. Naomi's gaze moved slowly across the room, landing briefly on each executive as if memorizing them in real time. Mark Whitmore sat straighter now, flipping to the final slide. We have a replacement candidate ready, he said. Strong presence, market confidence, exactly the image we need. Image. That word lingered longer than the others. Naomi had heard it her entire career. Not qualified. Not experienced. Not capable. Just not the image. Across the table, Lily felt it again, that quiet tension tightening in her chest. She leaned forward slightly, her voice hesitant but present. Should we not verify alignment with current leadership before making this decision? The question hung in the air longer than expected. Not because it was complex, but because it disrupted the rhythm. Richard turned his head slowly toward her, his expression tightening just enough to remind her where she stood. That will not be necessary, he said. We are the leadership in this room. Naomi's eyes flicked toward Lily for the briefest moment. Not approval. Not warning. Just acknowledgement. Then she looked back to the table. They were close now. Very close. Mark clicked forward again, revealing a timeline. 30 days. Transition period. Public announcement strategy. Every detail mapped out with the confidence of people who believe control was permanent. Naomi leaned back slightly in her chair, her posture unchanged, but her presence sharper now, more defined, like something coming into focus. You are moving quickly, she said calmly. Her voice did not rise, but it carried. It cut through the room in a way that made people stop without knowing why. Mark hesitated before responding. Speed is necessary in moments like this, he said. Naomi nodded once. Is it? She replied. 2 words. Simple. Controlled. But they landed heavier than the entire presentation. Richard exhaled sharply, irritation creeping into his tone. If you have something to say it clearly, he said. Otherwise, observe. Observe. Naomi's fingers rested lightly against the table again, tapping once, then stilling. 14 minutes. Exactly. Her phone vibrated a second time. She did not look at it. She did not need to. She already knew. Instead, she placed both hands flat on the table and slowly stood up. The movement was unhurried, but it shifted the air in the room instantly. Chairs creaked. Eyes lifted. Conversations stopped mid-thought. Even the skyline behind them seemed to fade into the background as attention pulled toward her. Richard frowned, confusion flashing across his face. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice no longer as steady as before. Naomi did not answer him immediately. She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes now, one by one, giving them the attention they had refused to give her. Calm, measured, final. Then she spoke. "You said you wanted a record," she said. "You are about to get one." A pause. Not long. Just enough to let the weight settle. Mark shifted in his seat. Lily's breath caught slightly. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but the sound never came. Because at that exact moment, the boardroom doors opened. Not forcefully. Not dramatically. Just enough. And everything that followed was no longer under their control. The door did not slam. It did not need to. It opened just enough to shift the balance of the room, and in walked a woman in a navy suit carrying a slim black folder, followed by 2 men in compliance badges and one quiet figure with a tablet already recording. No one spoke at first, but everyone felt it. The air changed. Richard straightened in his chair, forcing a smile that did not quite hold. "This meeting is restricted," he said quickly, his voice attempting control. "You cannot just walk in here." The woman did not look at him. Her eyes went directly to Naomi. "Ms. Ellis," she said clearly, her tone professional, precise. "Legal and compliance are present. Board override has been activated." Silence fell harder this time. Not confusion. Not irritation. Something heavier. Mark's hand froze halfway to his pen. Lily's eyes widened as the pieces began to fall into place, one by one, faster than she could process. Richard blinked, once then. Again. "Board override," he repeated, slower now, like the words were foreign. Naomi did not rush. She did not raise her voice. She simply stepped forward from her seat, her presence no longer blending into the room, but defining it. "Yes," she said. "Board override." The screen behind them flickered. Slides disappeared. Charts vanished, replaced by a single interface. Clean. Black. Authoritative. At the top, one name appeared in bold white letters. Naomi Ellis, Chief Executive Officer. The title did not announce itself loudly. It did not need to. It sat there, undeniable. Final. Mark leaned back in his chair as if distance could change what he was seeing. "This is not possible," he said under his breath, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Naomi turned slightly toward him. "It is already done," she replied. Her tone remained even, but there was no softness left in it. Only clarity. Richard stood abruptly, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor sharper than intended. "If this is some kind of misunderstanding," he began, but the sentence never finished. Because the woman in navy had already opened her folder. "This is not a misunderstanding," she said. "This is a formal intervention under executive authority." The tablet in the corner continued recording, capturing every reaction, every shift in posture, every realization unfolding in real time. Naomi walked slowly toward the head of the table, the seat they had told her she did not belong in. She did not ask permission. She did not hesitate. She placed her hand on the back of the chair for a brief second, then sat down. Calm. Centered. Exactly where she had always belonged. The room did not protest. It could not. Because the truth had already replaced the narrative they built. Lily exhaled quietly, almost involuntarily, her eyes fixed on Naomi now with a different kind of understanding. Not confusion. Not doubt. Recognition. Naomi looked around the table once more, meeting each gaze again. But this time there was no question in her eyes. Only conclusion. 14 minutes, she said. That is how long it took. No one asked what she meant. They already knew. The legal officer stepped forward slightly, ready, waiting. Naomi rested her hands lightly on the table, the same way she had before, But now the room leaned toward her instead of away. You evaluated leadership, she continued. You discussed removal. You made decisions. Her gaze sharpened, not with anger, but with precision. Now it is my turn. And in that moment, the room understood something they had missed from the very beginning. This was never a meeting they controlled. It was an evaluation they failed. No one moved. Not immediately. The weight of what had just happened settled slowly, like pressure building in a sealed room. Richard remained standing, but the authority he had carried minutes ago no longer held. It slipped, quietly, without resistance, as if it had never belonged to him in the first place. This is highly irregular, he said finally, his voice lower now, measured but strained. Naomi did not look at him. She glanced instead at the legal officer, who gave a small nod, confirming what had already been set in motion. Irregular would imply this is unexpected, Naomi replied calmly. It is not. Mark shifted in his seat again, his earlier confidence now replaced by calculation. If this is about process, he began carefully, we can revisit the discussion with proper alignment. Naomi turned her head slightly toward him, her expression unchanged. You already demonstrated your alignment, she said. Very clearly. The tablet in the corner continued capturing everything, the quiet witness that could not be argued with, could not be rewritten. Lily sat frozen, her pen still in her hand, but she was no longer taking notes. She was watching history shift in real time. Naomi rested her gaze on her for a brief second, then moved on. Not everyone in the room needed to fall. Some just needed to see. The legal officer stepped forward, opening the folder and placing several documents on the table with precise placement. Under executive authority, she began, we are initiating immediate review and enforcement of conduct violations observed during this session. The words were formal, controlled, but they carried weight that no one in the room could ignore. Richard let out a quiet breath, then forced a small laugh that did not land. You are basing this on a single meeting, he said. That is not grounds for action. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her hands still composed, her voice steady. This meeting was not the cause, she said. It was the confirmation. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. Mark looked down at the documents, then back at Naomi. What exactly are you suggesting? He asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew. Naomi held his gaze for a moment, long enough for the answer to settle before she spoke it. I am not suggesting anything, she said. I am deciding. The legal officer continued, her voice clear and structured. Effective immediately, all executive privileges for the individuals present under review are suspended pending full investigation. The words did not rise in volume, but they expanded across the room, filling every corner. Richard's posture stiffened. Suspended, he repeated, as if saying it might change its meaning. Naomi did not respond to him directly this time. She addressed the room. You spoke about leadership, she said. Presence, control, direction. Her eyes moved from one face to another, not missing a single reaction. Leadership is not how you speak when you feel powerful, she continued. It is how you act when you think no one is watching. Lily lowered her eyes slightly, absorbing every word. Mark leaned back again, his mind racing through outcomes, contingencies, exits. Naomi saw it. She always saw it. There will be no quiet transition, Naomi added. No clean narrative. She paused just long enough to let the certainty land. There will be accountability. The room did not argue. It could not. Because for the first time since the meeting began, no one believed they were in control of what happened next. And Naomi, still seated at the head of the table, had not raised her voice once. The word accountability did not fade when Naomi said it. It stayed. It settled into the room like something permanent, something that could not be negotiated away. No one reached for their phones. No one interrupted. Even the quiet hum of the city beyond the glass seemed distant now, irrelevant to what was unfolding inside that boardroom. Mark Whitmore adjusted his cuff slowly, buying himself a second, then another. Let us approach this rationally, he said, his voice measured again, attempting to rebuild ground that had already shifted. Decisions like this affect shareholders, markets, public trust. Naomi listened without reacting, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged. You are right, she said after a brief pause. They do. Mark leaned forward slightly, sensing an opening that did not exist. Then we should avoid escalation, he continued. We can correct course internally without creating unnecessary exposure. Naomi's gaze held his, calm and unwavering. You are not concerned about exposure. She replied. You are concerned about consequence. The distinction landed harder than anything said before. Mark's expression tightened, just enough to reveal what he could no longer hide. Richard remained standing, but his presence had changed. The certainty was gone, replaced by something quieter, more fragile. This is not how leadership operates, he said, though his voice no longer carried authority. Naomi turned her attention to him fully now. This is exactly how leadership operates, she said. It just does not look like what you are used to. Across the table, Lily felt the shift deepen. She was no longer witnessing a meeting. She was witnessing a correction. The legal officer stepped forward again, her tone steady, procedural. All access credentials tied to executive authority are being reviewed and will be temporarily restricted pending final determination, she said. One of the compliance officers moved toward the side console, connecting to the system without hesitation. Screens updated silently. Names remained, but permissions changed. Quietly. Instantly. Naomi watched it happen without expression. This was not reaction. This was execution. Richard noticed the screen, his eyes narrowing. You cannot just override an entire executive structure in real time, he said, though the evidence was already in front of him. Naomi did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I already have, she said. The simplicity of it removed any remaining illusion. Mark leaned back again, exhaling slowly, the realization settling in fully now. This was not a discussion. This was final. Naomi folded her hands lightly on the table, her gaze moving once more across the room. You built your authority on assumption, she said. On appearance. On who you believed belonged in this room. Her eyes paused briefly on Richard, then Mark, then the others. You made decisions based on that. No one denied it. No one could. Because the record existed. Every word. Every tone. Every dismissal. Naomi continued, her voice steady, controlled. Leadership is not granted by a title in a meeting, she said. It is revealed by how you treat the person you think cannot affect your outcome. Lily lowered her gaze again, not in shame, but in understanding. Naomi saw that too. And she moved on. This is not personal, Naomi added. It is structural. The legal officer nodded slightly, as if confirming what had already been defined. The system behind them continued updating, silent but decisive. Richard finally sat down, the motion slower than before, as if the weight of the moment had finally reached him. No one spoke after that. Not because they had nothing to say, but because for the first time since the meeting began, they understood that nothing they said would change what had already been decided. And Naomi Ellis, still calm, still composed, had not once needed to raise her voice to take back a room that was always hers. The silence did not break. It tightened. Every person in the room sat with the same realization settling in at different speeds, like a delayed echo reaching each of them one by one. Naomi Ellis did not rush the moment. She let it unfold. She let them sit inside it. Because this part mattered just as much as the decision itself. Mark Whitmore was the first to speak again, but the tone was different now, stripped of certainty, measured with caution. What is the scope of this review? He asked, his voice controlled but no longer leading. Naomi shifted her gaze toward him, not with urgency, but with precision. Comprehensive, she said. One word. Clear. Final. The legal officer stepped in without hesitation. All communications, decisions, and conduct tied to executive authority over the last 12 months will be evaluated, she explained. This includes internal discussions, hiring patterns, and governance actions. The words landed like a second wave, deeper than the first. Because this was no longer about one meeting. This was about everything. Richard Cole leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped now, no longer commanding, but containing. You are expanding this beyond reason, he said. There are protocols for this level of action. Naomi's expression did not change. There are, she replied. And you ignored them. The reminder was quiet, but it cut through any remaining argument. Across the table, one of the other executives shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the screen, then away, as if distance could soften what was already recorded. Naomi noticed. She always noticed. This is not about removing individuals, she continued. It is about correcting a system that allowed this behavior to exist unchecked. Lily lifted her eyes again, this time not uncertain, but focused. She was no longer observing confusion. She was witnessing clarity. The compliance officer spoke next, his voice steady, procedural. Access to external communications is being temporarily restricted to prevent unauthorized disclosures during the review period. Mark exhaled slowly, leaning back as if absorbing the full scope for the first time. So this is containment, he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly. No, she replied. This is accountability with structure. The distinction mattered. And he knew it. Richard's gaze dropped briefly to the table, then lifted again, searching for something that was no longer there. Control. Authority. Narrative. All of it had shifted. You could have addressed this privately, he said, quieter now. Naomi looked at him directly, her voice steady, unwavering. You chose to do this publicly, she said, in a room full of witnesses. That ended the argument before it could begin. Because he had. They all had. The record existed. Not just in systems, but in memory, in presence, in the way the room had changed. Naomi rested her hands lightly on the table again, the same composed posture, but now it carried a different weight. Not patience. Finality. There will be individual determinations, she continued. Based on conduct, not position. The legal officer nodded, confirming the process. One of the executives opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, then closed it again, understanding that interruption no longer had a place here. The system behind them updated once more, quietly adjusting roles, permissions, access levels. No announcements. No dramatics. Just change. Real and immediate. Naomi stood slowly, not abruptly, but with intention. The room followed her movement instinctively now, eyes lifting, attention aligning without resistance. You built a version of this company that depended on who you believed deserved to be here, she said. That version ends today. No one challenged her. No one corrected her. Because for the first time, they were no longer responding from power. They were responding from consequence. And Naomi Ellis, standing at the head of the table, had already moved beyond the moment they were still trying to understand. For a moment, nothing else happened. No one reached for a document. No one checked a screen. The systems had already shifted, the authority had already moved, and now the only thing left in the room was realization. Naomi Ellis stood still at the head of the table, her presence no longer questioned, no longer filtered through assumption. It simply was. And that was what unsettled them the most. Because it meant everything they had believed about control had been built on something fragile. Naomi's eyes moved slowly across the room again. But this time, there was no evaluation in them. That part was over. This was something else. A quiet reflection, almost detached, as if she were looking at a moment she had already moved past. For a split second, the room faded in her mind, replaced by something older, something quieter. A smaller conference room. Fluorescent lights. A long table she had not been invited to sit at. She had been 23, standing near the door, holding a folder she had prepared for a meeting she was not allowed to speak in. We will take it from here, someone had told her then, without looking up, without asking what she brought. She remembered the weight of that silence. Not loud, not aggressive, just dismissive. She had left that room without argument. Not because she agreed, but because she understood something they did not. Time changes positions, and power reveals itself eventually. The memory dissolved as quickly as it came. Naomi's focus returned to the present, to the boardroom, to the people now sitting in the same kind of silence she once stood in. But this time, she was not at the edge of the room. She was the center of it. And the difference was not anger. It was control. Richard shifted slightly in his seat, his voice quieter now, almost cautious. What happens next, he asked. It was not a challenge. It was a question, and that alone marked how far the room had shifted. Naomi did not answer immediately. She let the questions sit, letting them feel the absence of control they had once assumed was permanent. Then she spoke, her voice steady, grounded. Next, she said, you listen. The word landed differently than everything else before it, because it required something they had not done from the moment she walked in. The legal officer stepped forward again, outlining the next steps with structured clarity, but Naomi's presence remained the center of gravity in the room. Not the process, not the documents. Her. Lily sat straighter now, her pen finally moving again, but this time she was not writing what others said. She was recording what mattered. Naomi noticed that too. There will be interviews, Naomi continued. Individually. Separately. Not to defend your positions, but to explain your decisions. Mark nodded slowly, more to himself than anyone else, already understanding the weight of what that meant. There would be no group consensus to hide behind. No shared narrative to dilute responsibility. Just individual truth. Naomi stepped away from the head of the table, not retreating, but repositioning, creating space that did not diminish her authority, but reinforced it. You built your version of leadership in rooms where you believed the outcome was already decided, she said. This room is different. No one disagreed. No one could, because for the first time, they were not shaping the outcome. They were living inside it. Naomi paused near the window, the city stretching out behind her, vast and indifferent to what had just changed inside that room. Then she turned back one last time, her voice calm, unwavering. And this time, she said, you will be heard exactly as you were. The room did not respond. It absorbed. And in that silence, something far more powerful than authority took hold. Accountability that could not be redirected, could not be softened, could not be avoided. And Naomi Ellis, standing there without raising her voice, had already become the standard they would be measured against. No one asked to leave. No one checked the time. The boardroom had become something else entirely, no longer a place of authority, but a place of exposure. Naomi Ellis stood near the window for a moment longer, letting the silence settle into something permanent before she turned back toward the table. Every eye followed her now, without hesitation. Not out of respect alone, but out of recognition. The dynamic had shifted completely. We will begin now, she said, her voice calm, measured, leaving no room for delay. The legal officer nodded and signaled to the compliance team. One of them stepped forward with a tablet, placing it carefully on the table, the screen already active, already recording. This is a formal review session, the officer stated. All responses will be documented. Mark Whitmore straightened slightly, his hands folding together, trying to regain some sense of control through composure. If we are proceeding, he said, then we should ensure context is properly represented. Naomi looked at him, not dismissing, not agreeing, simply observing. You will have the opportunity to explain, she said. That is the purpose of this process. Richard exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the table before lifting again. Then let us be clear, he said. This meeting was a strategic discussion, not a judgment. Naomi stepped closer to the table, her presence grounding the room again. Every decision is a judgment, she replied. Especially the ones you believe are invisible. The words settled deeply, because they could not be denied. Lily sat still, her attention unwavering now, her pen moving steadily as she captured each exchange. She was no longer uncertain. She understood exactly what she was witnessing. The compliance officer began, his tone precise. Mr. Whitmore, he said, turning slightly toward Mark. During this session, you supported the removal of current leadership based on performance and presence. Can you clarify the criteria used for that assessment? Mark hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to be real. Market performance, stakeholder perception, and executive alignment, he answered. Naomi's gaze remained on him, steady, unblinking. And how did you evaluate presence? She asked. Mark paused again, this time longer. Leadership visibility, he said. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Visibility to whom? She asked. The question did not raise in volume, but it narrowed the space in the room. Mark did not answer immediately, because there was no clean answer. Richard shifted in his seat, stepping in. To the board, to investors, to the market, he said. Naomi nodded once. And how often did you evaluate that presence directly with me? She asked. The room went still again. Not tense, just exact. Because the answer was already known before it could be spoken. This is not about one question, Richard said quickly, attempting to redirect. This is about broader strategy. Naomi did not move. No, she said. This is about a pattern. The legal officer made a note. The sound of pen on paper was quiet, but it carried weight. Naomi continued, her voice steady, controlled. You discussed replacing leadership without engaging leadership, she said. You assessed performance without full context. And you defined presence without understanding it. Each statement landed clean, precise, irrefutable. Lily looked up briefly, her eyes meeting Naomi's for a moment, then returning to her notes. She was not just recording words anymore. She was recording accountability. The compliance officer shifted his attention. "Mr. Cole," he said, "you initiated the motion for transition. What was your primary justification?" Richard straightened slightly, his voice steady but no longer dominant. "The company requires stronger executive direction," he said. Naomi watched him carefully, then spoke again. "And you believe that direction was absent," she said. Richard held her gaze for a moment, then answered, "Yes." Naomi nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Then this process will clarify exactly where that absence exists," she said. No one interrupted. No one challenged. Because the room had moved beyond debate. It had entered something else entirely. A space where every word carried consequence, and every assumption was being measured in real time. And Naomi Ellis, still calm, still composed, was no longer responding to the room. She was defining it. The word absence did not fade after Richard said it. It lingered in the air, heavier than anything that came before, because now it had to be proven. Naomi Ellis did not react immediately. She let the silence expand, let the weight of his statement settle fully into the room, into the system recording every word, into the people who now understood that nothing spoken here would disappear. Then she stepped forward slightly, her presence tightening the focus of the room without raising her voice. "You said there was an absence of direction," she repeated calmly. "Let us define that." The compliance officer adjusted the tablet, preparing the next line of questioning, but Naomi raised her hand slightly, not to interrupt, but to take control of the sequence. "No," she said softly. "I will take this one." That alone shifted the dynamic again. Because this was no longer structured review. This was direct accountability. Naomi's eyes settled on Richard, steady, unwavering. "In the last 12 months, she began, "how many executive directives did you receive from my office?" Richard hesitated, his mind moving quickly through memory, through emails, through meetings. "Several," he answered carefully. Naomi nodded once. "How many did you implement without modification?" she asked. The question narrowed the space even further. Richard's jaw tightened slightly. "That depends on operational context," he said. Naomi held his gaze. "That was not the question," she replied. The precision in her tone removed any room for deflection. Richard exhaled slowly. "Not all of them," he admitted. Naomi inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the answer without reacting to it. "And how many did you delay?" she continued. Richard did not answer immediately this time, because now the pattern was visible, not just to him, to everyone. Mark looked down at the table, already seeing where this was going. Lily's pen moved faster now, capturing every word, every pause. Naomi continued, her voice still calm, but sharper now, more defined. "You identified an absence of direction," she said, "while actively altering, delaying, and redefining the direction that was given." The statement landed clean, undeniable. Richard shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence replaced by calculation that no longer worked. "That is an interpretation," he said, quieter now. Naomi did not move. "No," she replied. "That is a record." The legal officer made another note. The sound was small, but it carried finality. Naomi turned slightly, her attention shifting to Mark now. "You supported that assessment," she said. "Did you verify the execution of those directives before forming that conclusion?" Mark hesitated, then answered. "We reviewed outcomes," he said. Naomi nodded. "Outcomes shaped by altered execution," she replied. The distinction was immediate, and it closed the gap Mark had tried to leave open. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in possibility. Every path of deflection was narrowing. Naomi stepped back slightly, not retreating, but expanding the frame again. "This is how systems fail," she said. "Not from lack of direction, but from resistance disguised as leadership." No one spoke, because the truth in that statement did not require agreement. It required recognition. Naomi's gaze moved across the room once more, slower now, deliberate. "You believed you were correcting a problem," she continued, "but you were creating it." The compliance officer remained still, the legal officer continued documenting. The system recorded everything without bias. Lily looked up again, her expression no longer uncertain, but resolved. She understood now that this was not just a moment. It was a turning point. Naomi rested her hands lightly against the table one more time, grounding the room again with her presence. You said there was an absence, she said quietly. What you failed to see was that the absence was not in leadership. She paused, just long enough for the meaning to settle fully. It was in accountability. And this time, no one in the room misunderstood what she meant. The word accountability did not just land. It stayed. It settled into every corner of the room, pressing against every thought, every justification that had existed just minutes before. No one reached to respond. No one attempted to interrupt. Because now, for the first time, they were not thinking about what to say. They were thinking about what had already been said. Naomi Ellis remained still, her presence no longer something that needed to be asserted. It simply held the room in place. Mark Whitmore lowered his gaze briefly, then lifted it again, his voice quieter now, stripped of the structure he once relied on. If there were breakdowns in execution, he said carefully, then that can be addressed through process improvement. Naomi looked at him, not dismissing, not reacting, simply observing the attempt to reframe. You are still describing outcomes, she said. I am describing decisions. The difference closed the gap instantly. Mark did not respond again. Richard Cole leaned back slightly, his posture no longer forward, no longer leading. You are assigning intent where there may have been none, he said, though the certainty was gone from his tone. Naomi's eyes moved to him, steady, direct. Intent is revealed through repetition, she said, not explanation. The room absorbed that without resistance. Because repetition had already been established. Not once, not twice, but across time, across decisions, across patterns they had not expected to be examined this closely. The legal officer turned a page in her folder, her voice calm, procedural. Based on observed conduct and supporting records, preliminary findings indicate consistent deviation from executive directives and a pattern of independent decision-making outside approved governance structure. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. This was no longer interpretation. This was documentation. Lily paused her writing for a moment, her eyes lifting again, taking in the full weight of what was being said. She was no longer surprised. She was understanding. Naomi stepped forward slightly, not to dominate the space, but to bring it into focus again. You believed leadership was something you could redefine based on preference, she said. Based on comfort. Based on familiarity. Her gaze moved across the table, resting on each of them just long enough to make the point personal. You were wrong. No one challenged that. Because they could not. The evidence was no longer abstract. It was present. It was recorded. It was undeniable. The compliance officer adjusted the system again, the screen behind them updating quietly, highlighting internal records, timelines, communications. A pattern drawn out in data, not opinion. Naomi glanced briefly at the screen, then back to the room. This is what leadership actually looks like, she said. Not control, not volume, not assumption. Her voice remained even, but the clarity in it sharpened every word. It is consistency. It is accountability. It is the ability to recognize when you are wrong and correct it before someone else has to. The statement hung in the air, not demanding agreement, but requiring recognition. Richard's hands rested on the table now, no longer clasped tightly, no longer defensive. Just still. And if we acknowledge that, he said slowly, what is the resolution? It was the first time he had asked without resistance. Naomi looked at him for a moment, then at the rest of the room. This was the moment they had been moving toward from the very beginning. Not the confrontation, not the exposure, the outcome. Resolution is not a statement, she said. It is an action. The legal officer stepped forward again, ready, waiting for the directive. Naomi did not rush. She let the room feel the weight of what was about to be decided. Because this was the part that could not be undone. You evaluated leadership in 14 minutes, she said quietly. You made a decision without full context. She paused, just long enough for the contrast to settle. I will not. And in that moment, the room understood something they had not considered when this began. This was not just about what they had done. It was about what would happen next. And Naomi Ellis, still composed, still controlled, had already decided that the next step would not look anything like the way they had tried to remove her. Naomi Ellis did not speak immediately after saying she would not make the same mistake. She let that contrast settle fully, let it draw a clear line between what had just happened and what was about to happen next. The room remained still, not out of discipline, but because no one was certain how to move within a structure that no longer responded to them. The legal officer stood ready, documents prepared, but even she waited for Naomi to define the next step. That was the difference now. Nothing moved without her. Naomi walked slowly back toward the head of the table, not reclaiming it, but reinforcing what had already been established. Her hand rested lightly on the chair for a brief second before she remained standing beside it instead of sitting down. It was intentional. She was not here to settle in. She was here to conclude. You asked for resolution, she said calmly, her voice steady, grounded. You will have it. The words were not loud, but they carried finality that no one in the room could ignore. Mark Whitmore sat upright, his attention fully fixed now, no longer calculating, no longer redirecting. Just listening. Richard Cole's gaze remained on Naomi, no longer searching for leverage, only waiting for outcome. Naomi continued, her tone measured, precise. This review will continue beyond this room, she said. But certain decisions do not require delay. The legal officer stepped forward slightly, her pen ready, her posture aligned with what was about to be stated. Naomi's eyes moved across the table one last time, not to evaluate, but to acknowledge. Each person present had contributed to the moment they were now standing in. Effective immediately, Naomi said, all executive authority held by this current team is revoked. The sentence did not rise in volume. It did not need to. It landed with complete clarity, removing any remaining ambiguity. The compliance officer began entering commands into the system without hesitation. Screens updated in real time. Titles remained visible, but access lines shifted, authority stripped cleanly and without resistance. Mark exhaled slowly, the reality settling in without protest. Richard closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, not in defiance, but in acceptance. Naomi did not pause. Interim leadership will be assigned under direct oversight from my office, she continued. All ongoing decisions will be reviewed, validated, and, where necessary, corrected. The legal officer documented each word with precision. There was no confusion, no interpretation, only execution. Naomi's voice remained calm, but the weight behind it had fully taken hold of the room. This is not a removal based on disagreement, she said. This is a correction based on demonstrated failure to uphold governance. The distinction mattered. It defined everything. Lily sat still, her pen no longer moving, because there was nothing left to capture that had not already been made clear. Naomi stepped back slightly, creating space again, but not releasing control. You believed leadership was something you could decide in 14 minutes, she said quietly. You were wrong. No one responded, because there was nothing left to challenge. The system behind them completed its update, the final confirmation appearing silently on the screen. Authority had shifted completely. Not partially, not temporarily, completely. Naomi looked at the room one last time, her expression unchanged, her voice steady. This company does not operate on assumption, she said. It operates on accountability. The legal officer closed her folder. The compliance officer stepped back. The process had moved from discussion to conclusion. And in that moment, without raising her voice, without losing control, Naomi Ellis had done exactly what they believed she could not do. She did not just take back the room. She redefined it. No one stood up when it ended. No one reached for their things. The room remained exactly as it was, but everything inside it had changed. Naomi Ellis did not rush to leave. She did not signal closure with movement or gesture. She simply stood there for a moment longer, allowing the silence to finalize what had already been decided. Because this part mattered. Not the action, not the authority, the understanding. Mark Whitmore sat still, his hands resting on the table, no longer calculating outcomes, no longer searching for alternatives. For the first time, he was not thinking about control. He was thinking about consequence. Richard Cole remained seated as well, his posture no longer rigid, no longer defensive. Just still. The weight of realization had replaced everything else. Naomi looked at them both, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with clarity. This was never about removing people, she said calmly. It was about revealing decisions. The words settled differently now. Not as a statement. As a conclusion. The legal officer stepped back slightly, her role complete for the moment, while the compliance team quietly finalized documentation. Systems had already updated. Access had already shifted. There was nothing left to process, only to understand. Naomi turned slightly, her gaze moving toward the far end of the table where Lily Grant sat. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not instruction, not approval, recognition. Lily straightened, her grip on her pen loosening slightly as she realized she was no longer just an observer. She was a witness to a standard she would carry forward. Naomi looked away again, returning her attention to the room as a whole. Leadership is not proven when everything is visible, she continued. It is proven in moments like this. When you believe no one is watching. When you believe the outcome is already decided. Her voice remained steady, but every word carried weight that extended beyond the room itself. This was no longer just about the people present. It was about what would exist after them. Naomi took a step back from the table, not retreating, but creating space for what came next. You did not fail because you disagreed with me, she said. You failed because you decided who mattered before you had all the facts. No one argued. No one attempted to respond. Because there was nothing left to defend. The truth had already been documented, spoken, and confirmed. Naomi turned toward the door, her movement calm, controlled, final. She paused for a brief moment, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the table one last time. Not to hold on, but to close the moment with intention. Then she spoke again, without turning back. Respect is not something you request in this room, she said. It is something you demonstrate. Every time you walk into it. The words remained behind as she stepped away, the door opening quietly, then closing just as softly. No dramatic exit. No raised voices. Just a shift that could not be undone. The room stayed silent long after she left. Not because there was nothing to say, but because for the first time, everyone understood that what had just happened was not a moment. It was a standard. And Naomi Ellis had not just taken control of the room. She had redefined what it meant to belong in it.